So if we look at communication as topics of discussion, finances, children, routines, those kind of things, most couples that I deal with are pretty intelligent, high functioning people, and they can figure out how to deal with these issues if it were mine or yours. They're struggling with the toxicity that comes out of the cycle that they go into when they're communicating about tough topics. So if you take finances, for instance, finances is black and white numbers. Anybody can do the math of those things. But when you're dealing with each individual and the way their perceptions are about finances, then it gets a little tough to talk about them. The other problem is that if they're already in a toxic cycle in the way that they're communicating anyway, because they're getting triggers and you never know when you're going to offend them and what landmine it just stepped on, then what'll happen is they will stop talking about topics that they probably could solve on their own. They stop because they don't want to argue. And so when they start arguing about things, it brings up pain, it detaches the relationship, and then they don't want to talk about it anymore. So then simple things like children's routine or decisions about school or homework or finances, things that they could do on their own, they're not able to do anymore because of the toxicity of the cycle. Now, when you're looking at the toxicity of the cycle, it's called dynamic cycles. So the dynamic between one person and another person is usually pretty toxic if they deal with things differently. So you may have the pursuer or you may have the withdrawer. So the pursuer is trying to bring up the conversation, deal with the issues, and the withdrawer doesn't want to argue and solve the problem, so they pull back. Now, let me restate that. They want to solve the problem. They don't want to argue about the problem. And so the history inside of the couple's toxicity is that they're going to argue about something that should be black and white. And so both of their goals are to solve the issues with their children, solve the issues with their finances. They want to get to the peace place. But if the dynamic between them is one is going to pursue, not get the answer, the other one's going to withdraw, not give the answer, then it's going to cause them to not solve the issue, which means they can't communicate. So a lot of couples will talk about, I can't communicate with one person. Well, it's not that they can't talk about things. It's about the toxicity that's coming from the dynamic that they've created within that coupleship. And most coupleship will either go into a aggressor, meaning the pursuer, or the withdrawer. Those are the people that are very silent in having silent wars. They're really not talking for days, but no problems are being solved. So while they're not speaking about things, then the finances are crumbling or the children are not into the routine. So they have to learn how to talk with one another, but they cannot really deal with those issues until they look at their particular dynamic that they're having. So another dynamic may be you have the withdrawer, silencers, the aggressor. Those are kind of the Jerry Springer kind that will fight all the time and still not solve issues. And it's just a lot of aggression, a lot of anger going on. And then you have the pursuer withdrawer. Okay. So the pursuer withdrawer can sometimes get fairly abusive because both of those positions are fairly abusive. If you have someone pursuing, then if the withdrawer is hiding in the bathroom trying to get away from the pursuer, then they become very aggressive to have the claim of talk to me. You've got to speak to me. But then the withdrawer is holding on to so much power because you can't make somebody talk. So they are the ones that have most of the power, is the withdrawer. That's the passive role person. Now, most withdrawers do not see themselves as having a lot of power. They usually say, no, I'm just trying to get away from the aggressor. But they do have a lot of power because you can't make them talk. They don't usually know they have so much power because if they have a dynamic within themselves to interact in a withdrawing passivity type of personality type, then they will not be able to understand how much power they have because they always feel victimized by the aggressor.
You know, this might go to the next question then, because we had a lady write in and she said she needs to talk about what's going on and her husband doesn't want to talk. So that's probably what you're talking about right now. But she said that how does she get her husband to open up to her when all she's trying to do is settle the argument?
Well, that's a common problem for women. Sometimes it'll be the males that will, be the pursuer, but oftentimes it's the women, because we as women have a need to talk about things. Research says we need about 8,000 words a day, and men need about 2,000 words. Most men say there's no way I have to speak 2,000 words a day.
Oh.
But they do give it out during the day. If they're emailing, those are words. If they're talking about their job with their employers, that's words that they're using. By the time they get home, they don't have any more words. They've kind of used up their words. And then if their wife is needing to, talk about things, and that's a very complex thing, the wife needing to talk, because that goes into two different areas. One of them is just she needs to communicate her feelings, okay, to her person. And usually her person is her husband. So when you look at communication, you're looking at something called the woman needing communication. You're looking at something called oxytocin, which is a chemical that nurtures and is produced in the brain for women, that is only produced by them having conversations that are intimate, obviously with their intimate partner.
Interesting.
Well, men do not need that oxytocin that way. They get oxytocin through tunnel vision exercises, golfing, fishing, clicking the channels. That's how men produce that nurturing drugs. So if the women, the wives, are needing their husbands to produce that nurturing drug where they're communicating with their intimate partner, and the husbands are needing tunnel vision to get the nurturing drug, you can see at the end of the day how the husband needs to stop killing the giants and just watch TV for hours. And the woman is feeling fairly neglected because he's getting his oxytocin and she is not. So she gets offended and she starts griping at him. Why you got to watch TV? You've been golfing 3 times this week, whatever. Because what she's looking for is her oxytocin, and she can only get it through her intimate partner.
Is that the only way then she can get it? I was going to say, is there another way, or how do you teach them not to kind of go at each other? You just teach them the cycle?
You have to teach them the cycle. They have to understand that there is a cycle, which most of them know that they're in some kind of toxic dance. That's why they're withdrawing from it. But they don't understand that there's reasons they're in that cycle. So part of the reasons have to do with their development. So I have to teach them how they constructed as an individual from their family of origins, from how they brought coping mechanisms. And we act a lot as we did as children in the way that we cope with situations that are stressful. And so when we have to kind of make those trades, but those are not just cognitive behavioral trades. Those are trades you have to make at an emotional level. And it's really fun for the couples to be able to do it together when they're learning each other's stuff and kind of learning how they got wounded and how they're stepping on those triggers and creating those explosions that are landmines they don't know they're stepping on. And so as we go along and teach them these dynamics, then they are feeling a lot more accomplished and empowered as a couple as they're doing it together. So they're learning some intimate things about one another that don't feel very intimidating, yet they're being vulnerable, which increases the bonding between them. And so when women are talking about how do I get my husbands to, talk to me at the end of the day and I need this nurturing, sometimes just the education of that for men, they can kind of understand that because men are so used to being accused and attacked. They feel attacked by their wives.
Right.
And so the wives don't mean to attack them. They're just hurting and they're in pain. Well, most women, when they're hurting and they're in pain, they either cry or they scream. They have 2 levels of emotion. And so when a husband sees that, he doesn't know what to do with either one of those emotions. I mean, they don't know what to do. Why are you crying for that? They don't know how to connect those dots. And then they don't know how to deal with a woman's anger, because when men are angry together, they throw punches. And he doesn't want to hit his wife, so he tends to tune her out, which then makes her feel very neglected, and her oxytocin really doesn't get produced. So women can get their oxytocin in other ways, girlfriends, spiritual enlightenment, those kind of things, but they have a desire to get it from their husbands because that's how God created them to get it, because she is the weaker vessel. And God created him to cover her and to love her, which is why scripture says, husbands, treat your wife with understanding or your prayers will be hindered. We don't want the men's prayers to be hindered because they pray about specific things like finances, health for their children, any kind of other provision they need. Those were the things that they pray. even though they may not do it formally, like have a devotional where they're praying over their children. They're popcorn praying all day long. Lord, help me get this promotion. Lord, help me get this financial. I need this increase. And so as husbands are doing that, they have to understand that God created a tool for them to get those prayers unhindered, which is to treat his wife with understanding, because God knew he created that oxytocin to produce in her through connection to him. So I always tell couples at the end of the day, if they can just have a communication together where if the husbands can say, honey, I'm going to watch TV for about 30 minutes or an hour, knowing that she needs him to produce her oxytocin, and sit and listen to her. And then women need to understand that they need to have a period at an end of a sentence, because they will go on and on and on and lose their husband. But the reason they lose their husbands is because men tend to think in sentence structures that need a solution.
Okay.
Women don't need a solution of the problem most of the time they're talking.
It's more emotional?
Yes, they just need the connection. Do their husbands understand? Is he empathetic? Kind of like the girlfriend, which drives men batty. They cannot understand why women need to talk that way. But if he can just kind of entertain the fact she just really wants me to listen, she really wants me to kind of join with her, he'll have a lot more productivity in the conversation because he'll know his role. His role is not to solve the problem. That's what he thinks his role is, but it's not. So if you just kind of validates her and says, honey, I can see why you feel that, and have some kind of conversation where he can empathize, where he says, that kind of happens to me, or I can see why you would feel that way. That helps her. And this is a little tool I give guys. This is the sentence they need to remember. What I hear you saying is. And if he can just kind of remember that tool and then use it, then he'll kind of repeat or reframe for her what he hears her saying. He doesn't need to say it's right. He doesn't need to say it's wrong. He just needs to hear what she's saying and reframe it. And she might say, no, that's not what I'm saying at all. And that's okay. That should be okay with him. He doesn't need to feel inadequate or wrong or like he just failed the test. It's just she might need to get a little deeper into her emotions about it. And if she's just sitting there really engaged with her, she will feel very fulfilled and satisfied in the relationship.